Hello and welcome back. Our topic for this video is going to be ATP and chemical reactions. So with chemical reactions that are occurring within the cell, they kind of fall into two basic categories. All right, we are going to have exergonic reactions and we're going to have Endergonic reactions. Okay, and really the difference between the two, exergonic, just like exocytosis, you're giving something off from the cell. This is going to give off energy in the process of that chemical reaction. Endergonic reactions are going to be ones that require the input of energy to happen. All right, and we'll talk a little bit in another video about catabolic and anabolic reactions. So in terms of that, anabolic reactions typically are going to build bigger things. Catabolic are going to break things down. With those types of reactions, we're talking about macromolecules primarily. So when we talk again about creating strands of DNA, all right, you're going to have DNA strands synthesized. That'll be an anabolic reaction. If you break down DNA, that would be catabolic. All right. Exergonic reactions are going to be ones that give off energy from them. Endergonic ones are going to require the input of energy. And remember, when we're talking about cells, when I say energy, what I'm talking about is ATP. Okay? So in terms of that, an exergonic reaction, an energy reaction that gives off energy, would be something like cellular respiration, because the point of cellular respiration is to generate ATP. All right. An example of an endergonic reaction would be photosynthesis. You've got to put in energy to get the products out. In this case, for photosynthesis, the products you want to generate are going to be sugars and oxygen. All right. So in terms of that, you've got more potential energy here. Than you would in the products associated with exergonic reactions. Okay? And in terms of where that chemical energy is stored, we're talking about storing that chemical energy. It's stored in the bonds of those molecules that we talked about. So with those sugar molecules, in those covalent bonds, you've got energy stored there. And that's what's used in cellular respiration, okay, to generate ATP. So in terms of that ATP, I know I put this up in a previous video, but we've got, in terms of our ATP, we've got our adenine, our ribose, oops, good with the spelling today, our ribose, okay? And then it was triphosphate. So coming off of that, you've got 3 of those phosphate molecules. And really with ATP, where most of that dynamic energy is accessed is in that last phosphate group, because it's very easy to cleave or remove that last phosphate, okay? And with ATP, Let me just write it up here. This is ATP, okay? It's going to go between that and the other form, which is going to be ADP. So this would be adenosine diphosphate. Because we only have those two phosphates attached. All right. Typically what you'll see more commonly with this reaction, we've got ATP, ADP, and I've drawn this before. So this should look a little bit familiar. All right, to go from ATP to ADP, we lose a free phosphate, okay, because that phosphate, that terminal phosphate is cleaved off. That generates our ADP, all right. If we add in a phosphate, that'll bring us back to ATP, all right. And how all of this ties together, okay. The energy from the exergonic reactions are going to feed this side of the chemical pathway, or the cycle with ATP to ADP, okay? And in terms of that, when we release that phosphate, that is what provides the energy. For the endergonic reactions, okay? So there's an interplay here between exergonic and endergonic, okay? Exergonic is going to give off energy. For me, I remember it with exocytosis, something going out of the cell, you're giving it away, you're giving off energy here. Endergonic requires the input of energy, all right? So in terms of that, there's an interplay between those two, and with ATP, there are going to be three ways that that ATP is going to power work within the cell, okay? And in terms of the work, when we're talking about work, we're talking about actually accomplishing something or doing something. So in terms of that, I've said before, we are one big walking, talking chemical reaction. That's going to be one way that ATP is going to function within our body. It's providing the chemical energy needed to run chemical reactions, okay? And it's supplying that in the form of ATP, all right? You can also have mechanical work. And we aren't going to talk a whole lot about mechanical work this semester in introductory biology. But when you get to A&P, when you learn about muscle and muscle contraction, okay, that would be an example of mechanical work within the body. It takes energy for me to move from side to side across the screen here because I'm moving muscle, and that requires the input of ATP to get that work done. And that's considered in terms of the muscular system work because you've got proteins that are interacting to get that muscle to contract, okay? So that's where our mechanical energy with ATP is used, all right? And our last one is really going to be involved in Chapter 5, what we're talking about here, because we're talking about transport. So we're talking about moving things across membranes, all right? And ATP, when I talked in a previous video about active transport required ATP, okay? So with ATP, how it's actually doing work within the cell, we've got three different ways that that happens. You've got the chemical reactions that are happening, like with cellular respiration that we haven't talked about yet, but will be the next chapter for us to study. Mechanical work with muscle contractions and proteins interacting with one another. And then we've got transport with moving molecules across cellular membranes. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please let me know.